Because all men are brothers, wherever men may be, one union shall unite us, forever proud and free. No tyrant shall defeat us, no nation strike us down. All men who toil shall greet us, the whole wide world around. My sisters are all others, forever hand in hand, where chimes the bell of freedom. There is my native land. My sisters' fears are my fears, yellow, white, or brown. My sisters' tears are my tears, the whole wide world around. Let every voice be thunder, let every heart be strong, until all tyrants perish. Our work shall not be done. Let not our memories fail us. The lost year shall be found. Let slavery's chains be broken, the whole wide world around.
Thank you, Jeff and Betsy. Is this on? It's on. Yep. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Utica. I'm Glenn Coyne. I'm a member of the worship committee here. Every part of you is welcome here. Whoever you are, whomever you love, however you identify, you're welcome here. Whatever you believe, whatever you're skeptical of, whatever your deepest emotions are, you're welcome here. Every part of you is welcome here. Your doubts, your convictions, your beliefs, be they spiritual, religious, secular, everyone is welcome here. If you're visiting today for the first time, welcome. We're glad you're here. We'd like to get to know you, so if you can talk to any of us with a, well, here, sorry, with a, usually it's up there, with a laminated name tag, and we can tell you all about our church. If you'd like to sign up for our newsletter, you can do that too. For those online, do we have anybody online? For those online, usually we put it in the chat, right, Melissa? The link. So, welcome. I'm glad you're here. We're going to hear from Ken Drake in a few minutes. But for now, we open our hearts and minds to the wisdom of love and the experience of community. Thank you.
Good morning. Our call to worship this morning comes from Section 7A of the National Industrial Recovery Act of 1933. Employees shall have the right to organize and bargain collectively through representatives of their own choosing and shall be free from interference, restraint, or coercion of employers of labor or their agents in the designation of such representatives or in self-organization or in other activities for the purpose of collective bargaining or other mutual aid or protection. Okay, I mumbled through that. All right. Basically what that says is that laborers, workers can organize and bargain collectively and they should not be impeded in their efforts. We have a hymn at this point. I'll get out my order of service. It's hymn number 112, and if you would stand as you are able, 112 called Do You Hear?
Do you hear, oh my friend, in the place where you stand, through the sky, through the land? Do you hear, in the heights on the plain, in the vale on the main, in the sun, in the rain? Do you hear, through the roar, through the rush, through the throng, through the crush? Do you hear in the hush of your soul, of your soul? Hear the cry, fear won't still. Hear the heart's call to will. Hear a sigh, a startling trill in your soul, in your soul. From the place where you stand to the outermost strand, do you hear, oh my friend? Do you hear all the dreams, all the dares, all the sighs, all the prayers? They are yours, mine and theirs. Do you hear,
Our chalice lighting this morning comes from Opening Words for Labor Day by Megan Visser. We enter this sanctuary for kindness and comfort. May rough, worn hands and aching backs be healed. We enter this sanctuary of hope for equality for those who labor to survive and to live and to know justice. We enter this sanctuary of love and vocation. May our bonds of solidarity be strengthened. We enter this meeting house of courage and friendship. May we proceed hand in hand toward freedom. At this time, I would like to invite Stephanie Markham to the podium, and she will please us with Together Time. She promised she would.
No pressure, he says. Today, our story is The Last Wild Witch by Starhawk, with illustrations by Lindy Kehoe. I am abridging this book. It is quite long, so if you would like to read the story in full, please come see me in the back after the service. This book is about collective action. Once there was a perfect town in a perfect world where there were rules for everything and a right way and a wrong way to do everything, and nobody ever broke the rules. Well, hardly ever. For on the farthest edge of the perfect town stood the last magic forest, and the forest was wild. In the very heart of the last magic forest lived the last wild witch. Sometimes when the wind was from the west, it would carry the fragrance of her magic brew or a few notes of her magic songs into the town. And sometimes when the children were feeling low or when they left their windows open at night, they'd sniff the brew or hear a snatch of the song, and some of the wildness would get inside them. In the perfect town, the children always lined up perfectly. They sat perfectly still. They learned their lessons to perfection, and nobody ever misbehaved. Well, hardly ever. For when the wildness got inside them, they couldn't bear to walk in straight lines. They wouldn't go inside when they were told. They stayed outside laughing in the sunshine.
And once in a great while, a few of the children would sneak out at night and run through the forest to visit the last wild witch. "Have some soup," she would say. And that is all she would say. They weren't even tired in the morning. But their parents were tired and mad. They'd been very worried. Something must be done. It's all this wildness upsetting things. It's got to be stopped. The mayor called a town hall. "The wildness comes from the witch in the woods," the judge said. "We must stop her. The answer is clear. We must cut down all the trees and expose her hiding place." And that is just what they decided to do. "But that's not fair. What about the animals?" the children cried. Nobody listened to them. Late that night, the children snuck out of their open windows and ran out into the forest. Witch, the grown-ups are coming to cut down the forest and take you away." The witch just smiled. "Have some soup," she said. And that was all that she said. So the children sipped her magic brew and went home and cried. The next morning, the grown-ups of the perfect town went to the edge of the forest. "Today is a bright new dawn. Too long have we allowed wildness and chaos to flourish on the very edge of our town. Today we strike a blow for order." All the grown-ups cheered. The judge raised an axe, planted her feet, and swung at the largest tree. Thunk went the axe as it hit the tree. "Yow!" the tree screamed. All the grown-ups were so frightened they dropped their axes and hatchets and saws and chainsaws and ran back to the town. They held another meeting. "The answer is clear," the mayor said. "Tomorrow we'll plug our ears." And late that night, the children snuck out of their windows again. Witch, the grown-ups are coming back tomorrow and they're going to plug their ears. You've got to do something." The witch just smiled. "Have some soup," she said. And that was all that she said. The next morning, the grown-ups gathered again at the edge of their forest, ears plugged. Thunk went the axe as it bit into the wood. They didn't hear the scream of the tree. "Hooray!" all the people shouted. But all the trees began to rain down nuts and berries and branches on top of their heads. All the grown-ups screamed and dropped their axes and hatchets and saws and chainsaws and ran back to the town and held another meeting. "The answer is clear," the mayor said, standing up because he was too sore to sit down. "Tomorrow we must wear hard hats to protect us." Late that night, the children snuck out of their beds once again. Witch, the grown-ups are coming and they're going to wear hard hats this time." "Have some soup," the witch said, and that was all that she said. "Why won't you ever say anything to us?" Johnny asked. "Why won't you do something to save yourself?" The witch just smiled and spooned more broth into their bowls. Janie Green took another sip, and she remembered a dream. "Maybe we're supposed to do something," she said. "Maybe we're supposed to save the forest. I have a plan." The next morning, all the grown-ups gathered at the edge of the forest, all bundled up in heavy jackets and knee and elbow pads, so they walked very stiffly with their arms and legs straight out. On their heads were hard hats of every description, and they carried lighted torches. The mayor made another speech, but their ears were plugged, so nobody heard him. The children weren't listening. As the judge lifted the biggest torch and held it towards the branches of the nearest tree, the children ran into the forest as fast as they could. "Come back," the judge shouted. "We can't burn the woods with all you children in it." All of the adults became quite frantic. They put out their torches and ran into the woods after the children. "Come back," they shouted. But soon they were very tired of running in their heavy equipment. They took their padding off. They called for their children, but realized with their ears plugged, they couldn't hear if the children answered. It's rather pleasant in this forest, Janie's mother said. The judge glared at her. It's kind of nice by this stream, Johnny's father said. The mayor scowled at him. At last, they came to the clearing at the center of the forest, where the last witch was, stirring her cauldron and singing her songs. She didn't seem so bad. Have some soup, she said. Don't mind if I do, the mayor admitted, and they all sat down and drank some of her magic healing brew. Fellow townspeople, the mayor said, we've been saved from a great error by our children. The forest is not so bad. Perhaps we need a little wildness too. The children jumped out from their hiding places and let out a loud cheer. From that day, things changed in the perfect town. Sometimes at night, when the wind came out of the west carrying wildness with it, everyone gathered to dance and sing. So things were not so perfect in the no longer perfect town, but they were better. The end. So that was The Last Wild Witch by Starhawk, and like I said, I abridged it. It's much longer.
Good morning. I am Ken Drake, and I work with the Social Justice Council in this church and also the Racial Justice Team. I come from a union family. My father did not finish high school, went into the armed services before World War II, earned the rank of sergeant, and was in the Signal Corps. So when he came out of the service, he was fortunate enough to get a job with Ma Bell back in the day. As I recall, there were 3 times in my family's history that were really difficult times. There were 3 strikes that I remember. The last of which was a nationwide strike that occurred in the late 90s, early 70s. And most of the telephone companies within those individual states settled. New York did not. And the strike lasted for 218 days. I come from very meager means, and I remember if it wasn't for the largesse of the church that my family belonged to and the union dues that, or the union fund, strike fund that they had, and other ways of survival, going to the neighborhood. We had neighborhood groceries. You remember those, some of you? And neighborhood grocers would give them credit. They could buy their provisions on credit. So at any rate, that was a hard time for my family. And I had, at that point, graduated from college, so I wasn't around all the time, but I remember the stress and strain that put on the family. They did settle. My father finished his career with New York Tel, and things after that were okay until Ma Bell was broken up, let's say. Okay, so my father-in-law, he was a person who did graduate from high school, coincidentally with my mother in a small town, Whitehall, New York. He was drafted into the service or joined the Army Air Corps. And when he came out of the service, he was fortunate enough to benefit from the GI Bill. So he went to college, earned his teaching undergraduate degree and also a master's degree in mathematics, and was just an amazing math teacher, renowned math teacher in Long Island. He was one of the founders of the Union Free District number 4 on Long Island, which later became the Northport Teachers Association. And any of you who know union history for teachers, we had teachers associations, okay? We had NEA predominantly at the time, and then of course the American Federation of Teachers came later. So he started one of the labor unions on Long Island. When I graduated from college and became a teacher at Vernon Verona Sherrill Central School, I became a member of NYSTA, okay, that later became NYSUT, that later was a part of AFT, that later became a coalition with NEA. So now it's all like one big happy family, I would say. But at any rate, there are unresolved issues with NYSUT. One of them is Tier 6. They have 6 levels of retirement in the teacher retirement system, and Tier 6 is not a very good one at all. It's quite lacking in so many ways. I remember when I was active in the union, we had 3 things. We always were negotiating for more money. We wanted medical insurance, and we also wanted changes in our work schedule. So those are the predominant things that we negotiated for. I remember as an elementary school teacher, one of the big points of negotiation for someone like me was getting a duty-free 40-minute lunch period. Because when I first started, we had 30-minute periods of lunch and we had to eat with the children. So my high school colleagues, they had a whole different way of going through a day, because they had periods, with prep periods and lunch-free duty and all that. And we elementary teachers didn't have that. So we got that eventually. Another incident that really resonates with me was the contract said that we could have 2 paid personal days. And in the contract, it said that we could not take those days before or after a vacation. So some people did. I know I have a couple of, I know there's a few teachers, retired teachers in the group, and Matt, I know is a teacher currently. But at any rate, I worked with a very dear lady who's one of my dearest friends for over, well, all our married life, and 50 years. And she was one of those people. So when we sat down at the negotiating table, the superintendent and the administration said, okay, we can resolve this by taking away everyone's personal days. And of course, in the contract, it said, if you take a personal day before or after a vacation, you have to be doctor pay. So even though my best friend was one of these people, and it was consistent, I mean, year after year, we said as a union, absolutely not. Just do what it says in the contract, make those people own up to their responsibility. Well, we didn't lose our personal days, and I think my friend kept doing what she was doing, but anyway, that's another story. So unions have, unionists, we mostly try to work on, maintaining a living wage and also getting certain benefits, as it pertains to daily schedules. All right, labor issues in 2023. More workers across industries have taken a hard stance against companies for dramatic improvements in compensation and working conditions. And as you know, a lot of our union activity is with service industries, and there's a lot of abuses on the part of employers, not hiring people full-time, making them work long hours. There's one story I read where people, temp workers in the auto industry make $14.95 an hour to work the night shift, as opposed to $25 to $35 an hour if you work the day shift. So, I mean, they have those kinds of pressures on people. There were many union initiatives across America in the last year, and they involve all sorts of industries, even lawyers. I was surprised, lawyers, in one part of the country. More than 320,000 workers have participated in at least 230 strikes so far this year, according to data from the Cornell University School of Industrial and Labor Relations. You might want to Google that if you're kind of interested in this whole thing like I am. And they have some wonderful documents, and statistics on labor in the United States. Now, 320,000, when you say that number, that's a large number of people. But keep in mind, the number of unionists in this country is about 10% of the population. Whereas back in the day, in the heyday, it was somewhere between 16, and 25%, depending. So I mean, there has been a decrease, and there are some industries such as Starbucks, right, where the workers have tried to organize. Okay. Now, typically unions, which had demands and they had successful job action, they were successful because it was more of a national or a large region of activity. Unfortunately, many of the unions that have job actions today are more parochial. They're very limited in nature. They're one group here that has demands, so they don't have the power of number, and influence to make a difference. UPS workers, you've read about them, right? Airline pilots, they have won rich labor deals, comparatively speaking. And UPS, if I'm not mistaken, is the only unionized delivery service. Amazon is not, nor FedEx. So when I ship, pardon me? Oh, yeah, United States. I'm thinking that's right. Government, private sector. So when I ship something, I try to use UPS as opposed to FedEx, just for that reason. Hollywood writers and actors, they've been on strike for quite some time now. Auto workers are calling for a strike September 14th if their demands aren't met. And again, there's a lot of issues there, but with the Hollywood writers and the auto industry, can you think of one reason why negotiations in the future are going to be even more complex or convoluted? Exactly. With the auto workers, they have, they're going to be manufacturing electric cars. And I read they have 200,000 less parts. So if you remember back to the 2008 Great Recession, and the government bailed out a lot of groups. One of them was the auto industry. And my son, who's an actuary, and we discuss these things occasionally. And he said, Dad, if the auto workers were not bailed out, not only would that massive amount of workers, would they have been affected, but think of all of the small businesses like Napa, or the small companies that make just a component that goes into a modern vehicle today. So that would have been like a worldwide depression. Agree with it or not, that's what happened. All right, that's just a brief overview. I Googled number of strikes in the United States in 2023, and this is some of the data that I found. Again, you can Google all this information for Microsoft, which has more or less created somewhat of a monopoly, but anyway. Before I begin this next section, and I have lots of stuff here, but I'm not going to try to get through all of it. But do you remember It's a Wonderful Life? Does anybody remember the name of the bank that the Baileys owned? Yes, very good. And if I had a product, I would give you a piece of candy or something. Building and Loan. And remember what happened in that story. Remember, the two significant things are that one individual he bought the bank, or got control of the bank, and the whole town then was in jeopardy, right? And then the whole town at the end, all of the people that had mortgages, you know, all their homes were tied up with the bank. They all came in and bailed out the Baileys. That's an interesting story, and that kind of sets up why the US economy is rigged, okay, in favor of a few. There's a small percentage of people, as you know, in this country that have amassed a great deal of wealth. And they use that wealth to influence important individuals, such as politicians and Supreme Court judges. I mean, and others. My interest in income inequality peaked in 2006 when I read an article in The Atlantic written by Clive Crook. That's an interesting name. And he was talking about an article that was that he read by a Dutch economist called by the name of Jean Pen. And he had written an article about income distribution in 1971. I'm not going to read the entire article, but just to give you an idea of what he wrote. It was about a parade of people that earned money or that acquired money, okay? The parade begins with everybody marching with their heads underground. The upright marchers were very tiny. They were just inches tall. These were the full-time labor force, unskilled manual, clerical workers, burger flippers, shop assistants, and then about waist high. Then it started to get dull because there were so many small people. Halfway through the parade, observers expected to be looking people in the eye, average height. No, the marchers were still quite small, experienced tradespeople, skilled industrial workers, trained office staff, and so on, yet they were not yet 5 feet tall. 45 minutes into the march, things started to change. Final 6 minutes, people with earnings in the top 10% started to arrive. Doctors, lawyers, seniors, civil servants, 20 feet tall, sped by. Moments later, corporate executives, bankers, and stockbrokers, 50 feet, 100 feet, 50 feet high. Last few seconds, you get a glimpse of pop stars, movie stars, and the most successful entrepreneurs. You could see only up to their knees, but they were going by. And then at the end, John Paul Getty, the Getty oil fortune, all you could see was the sole of his feet, which was more than 500 feet high. That kind of got me very, very interested, that article, and I kept it for a number of years. But there's even more information out there about income inequality in our country today. To me, that problem of income disparity and poverty are the most serious problems that we face in this country. And I say that because I think we could do something about it if we had a different mindset. So, I mean, that's essentially one of the points I want to make today. On the front of your program, or order of service, you know, the group at the top are the capitalists. I suggest to you that if we were to draw this diagram today, that would be huge, extremely large, much bigger than it is. If you look at the bottom, those are the hardworking people that grow all the food, make all the things, right? Then you have we eat for you, all of the people who have the good life, so to speak, and then the soldiers. And keep in mind, nothing against police, but we do live in kind of a police state, and if people get out of hand, they're at the ready to move. I'm not a communist. I'm just saying that is a reality. We've seen that back in the day when, remember, the miners used to strike and the Pinkertons would show up, and then you had the state police and whatnot. At any rate, then the religions, they fool us. And then you have the aristocracy at the top, and then, of course, the capitalists. The point of this is that it gets smaller as you get to the top, so that 10%, they have a vast amount of wealth. And let's say 1%, 5%. Let's not deal with too many figures, absolutes. Now, this wasn't always the case. Back after World War II and the Great Depression, and as I read earlier with Roosevelt's New Deal, there was a change of attitude about going after people that would concentrated economic power, and the labor unions were supported. And what evolved called stakeholder capitalism. Now, it wasn't beneficial for all Americans because blacks and people from certain immigrant groups or religions didn't always benefit from this. But back in the day, when you had small communities or cities that were identified with an industry, the community leaders in those communities, they were members of a church, they were members of a community organization like Rotary or Lions, and there was a community benefit. As a golfer, I remember going to Binghamton, and we used to play the IBM course there. In Sherrill, we used to have Oneida Limited silversmiths. They went bankrupt, but and they were non-union, but they had health care for their employees. They had nurses on site in the factories. They took care of their workers. And in this book, which I recommend to you by Matt Stoller, it's called Goliath. It really describes in very vivid detail, how monopolists are constantly trying to get, corporatists are constantly trying to get control of everything. And in this book, he maintains that they've either won or they're winning that battle. Now, income inequality and poverty exist intentionally. It exists on purpose. And this is called shareholder capitalism. You've all read, perhaps many of you have read, about how there's stock buybacks by companies. So we're in a period of what is called financial capitalism. That's different from industrial capitalism that I just described a moment ago. So the money is just recirculating through these institutions of finance. It's being manipulated for their benefit. Now, just a couple of more points because of time and because of, if you're like me, you get a little numb after a while, listening to certain statistics. But Robert Reich, an economist I read, Barb and I we subscribe to his daily newsletter, and I ordered his book, The Common Good, which I recommend to you if you haven't read it. As the super wealthy and big corporations pour money into politics, they don't want the rest of America to notice they're rigging the economy for their own benefit, their unrestrained greed, and he calls it greedification instead of inflation, and the climate crisis, and they're also undermining democracy, right? Did you just read recently, perhaps, or hear recently that the wealthy are contributing more to climate mitigation or climate degradation than many other people because of their private jets, because of their multiple homes, blah, blah, blah. He maintains that inflation is being propelled by an not by an overheated economy, it's being propelled by overheated profits. Now, there's 5 areas, 6, that all Americans have to deal with all the time. Can we mention what those might be? What are the 5 areas that impact everybody every day, the cost of which can be, devastating to people? Healthcare, housing, food, energy, transportation. I put those together. And one more for working moms. So in America, those sectors, they don't have to be structured the way they are. Again, I'm deviating a little bit. There's a difference between liberal and progressive. If a food insecurity, the liberal will have a food drive. The progressive will ask, why do we have this problem? Change the system, exactly. And I just want to make one more point before I get into a couple of more points, and I'll end momentarily. The middle class in the 1920s and throughout the golden age between 1930 and 1960, the middle class existed because the wages increased. They weren't living wages, but the wages increased. But there was one other thing that they had access to that is now out of control in this country. Anybody? Well, that's one of them. No, there's credit. People in this country, there's less than 25% of Americans that have some kind of credit, that don't have credit debt, a massive debt. The finance capitalists, they make sure that they keep the money and that they make it difficult for us to exist on a day-to-day basis. But credit is the one thing that that was provided, the banking industry provided for people during those times when you see more rising in productivity and consumption. All right, conclusion. The financiers follow neoliberalism, which is essentially do away with the state, all capital, state. They want tax cuts, and they occurred during the Bush administration, the Obama administration, and during the Trump administration. They want deregulation, but only deregulation as it applies to their businesses. If it's going to help their business, there's something called regulatory narrow regulation, that they try to maintain competitive control over something in the economy. And then privatization. So they can charge for your services, especially in the healthcare industry. So, Dark Money by Jane Mayer. How many have read that book, Dark Money? If you haven't, it was written 2016. I suggest it's not an easy book to get through, but it's very enlightening. The other book I really liked was Wild Land, The Making of America. When you read it, we'll have a nice discussion as to why I would never want Joe Manchin to be considered for our leader of our great nation. But this book here, the one thing that resonated with me the most was Prescott Bush, the granddaddy of all the Bushes. He lived in Greenwich, Connecticut, which is one of the highest income areas in the country. And a lot of hedge fund managers and equity fund managers live in Greenwich. When he was alive, he was one of those people, one of those stakeholder capitalists. He believed in helping the community, helping all people in his community. Not all, I mean, probably not the Black people, but most people in his community. He represented that kind of stakeholder as opposed to the shareholder that, do you remember Jack Welch from GE, how he destroyed that industry in the United States? So what I want to leave you with today is labor right now in this country has rules and regulations against the organization and the activities that unions can engage in. And then also that in America today, we have this shareholder, which because of the concentration of the money and the influence they have in Washington, we are all affected by that. And to drive this home, I'll say, when you use a credit card today, do you ever ask the merchant or the proprietor, do you have a service charge on this? 3 to 4%? Bingo. That's how it affects everyone, okay? So that's part of what I wanted to say today. I appreciate you all for listening. Thank you. Okay. We have time we are now going to sing another hymn before community candles. And in your order of service, stand as you are able to sing hymn 143.
Not in vain the distance begins. Forward, forward, let us range. Let the great road spin forever down the ringing grooves of change. Through the shadows of the globe we sweep ahead to heights sublime. We, the heirs of all the ages, in the foremost files of time. Oh, we see the crescent promise of that spirit has not set. Ancient founts of inspiration well through all our fancies yet. And we doubt not through the ages one increasing purpose runs, and the thoughts of all are widened with the process of the suns. Yea, we dip into the future, far as human eye can see the vision of the world and all the wonder that shall be. Hear the war drum throb no longer, see the battle flags unfurled in the parliament of freedom, federation of the world.
Our meditation prayer today is a Jewish blessing for work. May you protect us on our leaving and on our return, and rescue us from any harm. And you may bless the work of our hands, and may our deeds merit honor for you. Praise to you, Adonai, protector of Israel. Adonai.
And now is the time when, in our service, when we ask you to dig deep and help us run this wonderful service. And as Stephanie was talking about the forest, I thought we have our own little forest. If you look around us on our property, and it all has to be maintained, and it's part of the beauty of this church and why we support it financially. Thank you. Now please join me in reciting our Extinguishing the Chalice words on your program. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of... These we carry in our hearts until we meet again.
Our benediction this morning is from the UUA 2017 Statement of Conscience. A moral economic system would include the following, and this is a partial list: equal pay for equal work and elimination of the racial, ethnic, and gendered wealth gap. A major societal investment in communities that have been left out and locked out. A guaranteed minimum income for everyone, a minimum wage indexed for inflation that provides a living wage with benefits regardless of disability or ability, a tax structure that rewards the creation of good-paying jobs, worker protections and rights, a union movement, and a worker-friendly trade agreements, a growing sector of locally owned businesses and worker-owned cooperatives, and wages that honor the work of hands as well as those of minds. So our postlude will be this land is your land, Jeffrey.
Yeah. Before that, let me mention, the UU Church used to close for the summer. We used to go out of business and then all come back together at what was called homecoming, and that was the second Sunday in September. So now we stay open year-round, but we still have homecoming, which is also called Ingathering, and that's next Sunday. For those of you who may not have come to that service, sometimes people bring water from somewhere that is meaningful to them. And if they, forgot to get the water from Niagara Falls or wherever, we have symbolic water that you can just take, and it can be from anywhere that you wish it to be. So come next week to the homecoming service. And for the postlude, please sing along with us on the chorus. We've put a couple of verses together a couple of times so that we can all have cookies and zucchini bread earlier. But here we go with This Land Is Your Land. This land is your land. This land is my land. From California to the New York Island, from the redwood forest to the Gulf Stream waters. Oh, this land was made for you and me.
all below me, that golden valley. Oh, this land was made for you and me.
I roamed and I rambled, and I followed my footsteps to the sparkling sands of her diamond desert, while all around me a voice was shouting,
This land was made for you and me. This land is your land. This land is my land. From California to the New York Islands, from the redwood forest to the Gulf Stream waters. Oh, this land was made for you and me. When the sun came shining and I was strolling, and the wheat fields were waving and the dust clouds rolling, a voice was chanting as the fog was lifting, saying, This land was made for you and me.
As I went walking, I saw a sign there, and on that sign it said no trespassing, but on the other side it didn't say nothing.
Oh,
That side was made for you and me.
this land is your land. This land is my land. From California to the New York Islands, from the redwood forest to the Gulf Stream waters. Oh, this land was made for you and me. Nobody living can ever stop me as I go walking that freedom highway. Nobody living can make me turn back. Oh, this land was made for you and me. Last
Everybody.
chorus. This land is your land. This land is my land. From California to the New York Islands, from the redwood forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me. This land was made for you and me. Oh, this land was made for you and me. Have a great week.
What